Hello and welcome to A Critical Dragon, where I talk about narrative in film, television, and in books, and sometimes I discuss things with my nemesis. Dr. Philip Chase, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing very well, AP. It is an extreme pleasure to be here to discuss Rings of Power with you, episode 6, Udûn. Udûn? How do you say that? How is your Elvish?
Ramen noodle? I don't know.
But it is a pleasure to be here, and I'm excited to talk about this episode.
Yeah, I've seen actually quite a lot of the reaction online. And this is going to make me sound bad. A lot of the reaction online has actually been really, really positive about this episode. And I think they're really positive because there's action in it, it's bringing story threads together. For me, that is one of the least pleasurable aspects of the episode. There are chunks of this episode I really, really love, but I think everyone knows action is not the thing that I really get engaged with. That's not the thing that entertains me the most. So I am not saying it's bad. I think it's a good episode. I enjoyed the episode, but in comparison to those slower episodes that were all about characters talking, that's actually what I like. I could watch an entire TV show of characters just sitting around talking all the time because that's what entertains me. So I know I'm in the minority on this one. But I thought it was a very good episode. It was enjoyable and there was some great action in it.
Well, I will resist making any snarky comments about lots of talking. And instead, I will observe that, yes, you're right. This was the most action-packed episode, in my opinion, of the season. But there were some nice calm. They were savvy enough to insert some calmer moments in
Yeah.
between the action, which made this episode work for me very well.
And that's one thing when we talk about pacing issues a lot, knowing that you can have like a stirring section and then a quiet section.
Mm.
That alternation is actually like a really good pacing technique or a level of high action and then a quiet moment because it gives the audience time to recover. And sometimes I think when people talk about pacing, that they're not thinking of that. They're thinking of something else. But there's a whole structural aspect to pacing, and this episode did it very well. We had, if you think like, at the beginning, the big stirring speech from Adar to the orcs, which is a complete inversion of what we expect because the orcs are the bad guys. The orcs are irredeemably evil and irredeemably corrupt, and yet this goes to the very heart of, I suppose, what Tolkien and Tolkien scholars would call the orc question, because Tolkien wrestled with this. He got really obsessed with trying to solve this issue
Mm.
because essentially the orcs are meant to be irredeemably evil and corrupt and horrible, but they also have life and a mind and sentience and were enslaved. So are they victims and not? If they have life, then that must be divinely sanctioned, but they're corrupted life. So can they
Mm.
never? And he went round and round trying to square that circle because on the one hand, the orcs are evil. On the other hand, they come from corrupted elves. And what can be corrupted, can it not be uncorrupted? Can it not be saved?
Hmm.
And you can see the struggle in that. They are sentient. They have language. They speak multiple languages. They have apparently friendship groups. They can show reverence for each other. And I think this show has done a brilliant, a brilliant service to a lot of Tolkien scholarship by simply illustrating that, by showing people this on the screen. Because sometimes it's easy to sort of go, oh, they're just orcs. But when we see it on screen, when we see how much Adar actually cares about them,
Yeah.
and we hear the stirring speech and them react to it, we get called to mind all of those stirring speeches that heroic leaders give, and we see Arondir and Bronwyn doing their best for people who they're trying to encourage the villagers, and like they do a good job, but they're not naturally charismatic leaders. They're not the leaders of the people, and so I actually thought the nice contrast there. Adar giving the speech at the start and burying the seeds, the
Hmm.
elvish custom. Aaron, they're doing exactly the same thing later on. And
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
just really nice mirroring.
The repetition of the ritual there was well done. It's interesting because I've been trying to wrap my head around this, and my take on this is that this episode had some very Tolkienian moments, like the burying of the seed, but also I would say the moment when Bronwyn was reciting those lines about the light beyond the shadow to Theo. That's a very Tolkienian moment.
Yeah, except now, and this would be one of those, like, I like the line,
Yeah.
but the context in which it's delivered, I went, because if you think of everything else that they say, nothing else is framed like that. But if she had said,
Right.
or if it had been framed as, do you remember that line from that old poem? Or what was that fragment of the poem that you used to recite to me? Something that would give that high elevated language a reason for being there, because it is a beautiful line, but it kind of sticks out because none of the rest of their speech is like that. And
I
so
think
it's
it's
nice.
similar. Yeah, you're right. But for me, it was also similar to the Poppy song. It was just a moment of, okay, this I feel like this is very Tolkienian here. But
Poppy song fitted.
In the context, it did fit better
it
in that particular
really
context.
worked.
Yeah.
And so
But also, I was gonna say too that in addition to these very Tolkienian moments that they're going for, and we can debate how successfully they're inserted or not, but they're going for that. At the same time, they're doing something that Tolkien never did, which is, and though you said correctly that he wrestled with this, he never really went there. He never really presented the orc side of things. He never actually presented them in a manner where you feel like, oh, maybe the orcs have a point here, or they have a perspective that is understandable when Adar is explaining why can't we have a place to live, right? And in that moment too, when he's being interrogated by Galadriel, who's willing to torture him and the orcs, hey, talk or I'll put them out in the sunlight. I mean, that was kind of, whoa, that was brutal. So we've switched perspectives there a bit, I think, and that's not something. Even if he did think about, the ultimate fate of orcs, I don't think Tolkien ever, to my knowledge, in his writing, ever explored them in this way. And they do it in a way that's still connected to Tolkien, where the origin story of orcs, that they were tortured and twisted elves. I think they're using that pretty well here in creating a very interesting and complex and sometimes sympathetic villain in Adar, which I like. I'm really liking the actor's delivery on it too. That scene, both of us, I think, are going to say it's one of our favorite scenes between Galadriel and Adar. So they're doing something interesting here that Tolkien never did, but it's a logical consequence of what Tolkien set up.
Yeah. And what's interesting is Galadriel's attitude to the orcs, where she comes across as a genocidal maniac. We get taken aback by that. And she obviously, Halbrand steps in. We can talk about that when we get to the scene. What is so fascinating about that sequence for me is we see Galadriel say this. We see Galadriel threaten this. And we go, oh, that's terrible. How could she do that? And yet almost everyone at the Battle of the Hornburg, so the Battle of the Two Towers at Helm's Deep, when the allies have held off the attack and the orcs are camped in the middle of the valley, and the Ents shepherd down the Huron, the trees.
Yeah.
And the allies just sit there as the trees massacre all of them.
The fleeing orcs.
All of the fleeing orcs are massacred by the trees. And then the next morning, there's barely a trace that they were ever there. And the allies are like, huzzah! And because we're reading it from that perspective, we agree with that. And what this show has done is taken our position on orcs from the Third Age, that all of the massacring of the orcs and the fact that, oh, look, the writers of Rohan, the Rohirrim, are just writing down and massacring all of these orcs. Well, they're perfectly justified. Eomer was right to do this, even though they were just a patrol running through to somewhere else. We agreed with that all the way through The Lord of the Rings. Now we see what that looks like when someone actually describes it to us and we know a bit about the orcish perspective. Yeah. And so Galadriel's threatening to kill the orcs is that position that we as readers have had and continue to have and continue to sort of go, oh yeah, but they're just orcs. That we see them as disposable, evil, irredeemably evil and corrupt. And yeah, they should just be slaughtered. We have never had a problem with that. And yet, as soon as Galadriel says it, we're confronted by our own bias, our own prejudice, our own construction of them. And that is why that sequence is one of my favorite sequences in this show. It confronts the viewer with their own prejudice. The fact that anytime we see the orcs being killed by the heroes, we celebrate. And
yeah,
yet,
it makes you think that your nemesis might actually be the good guy.
so that's one that's one of the reasons why I really liked that particular exchange. Not only did we get the development of the fact that Adar isn't actually an elf anymore. His blood has turned black. He is the first of the orcs, the Uruk.
Yes.
And it was through Morgoth twisting and corrupting them. So he actually changed genus, if you will. And so he isn't properly elf anymore. But if you notice this, we got a good look at his armor, in particular in this episode. It's the same armor that Gil-galad wears, except blackened. So the darker version. So again, that, very clear visual signaling of good guy versus bad guy. And so I liked the complications and nuance they're adding to this discussion, because it is so easy for us, particularly if we've just read The Lord of the Rings, to go, well, okay, so the orcs might, speak 3 separate languages and actually look after Merry and Pippin when they capture them and feed them and look after them. And have an argument about whose orders they're going to follow and what they're going to do, and so demonstrate free will. Like, we might realize all of that, but it's great when they get murdered and massacred and genocided.
Yeah.
Being confronted with that in this show, I thought was a very brave decision, and I thought it was an excellent decision. I really liked it.
Yeah. Interestingly, too, I tried to recall, and I couldn't, any other example of any presentation, any story of Middle Earth where orcs were taken prisoner and allowed to live. And this was an episode where we had orcs taken prisoner, that for a moment there, at least. And again, it's presenting them as, rather than kill on sight, not worthy of even consideration, they're being presented as sentient beings that are worth taking prisoner, rather than just massacring right there and then. So I thought that was interesting too.
Yeah, it's changing the orcs from monster into enemy. And for some, that mightn't be a major distinction, but monsters you kill on sight, monsters you don't care about. An enemy is still entitled to a certain level of treatment if you've defeated them in battle. And it actually elevates the orcs above the sort of, oh, they're basically just upright wargs. And so it complicates the morality of the situation. And given that we're dealing with Galadriel's hyper focus on revenge, and I'd said in the previous episode, we're starting to see a break in that. And again, we see it really wrestled with here, because the moment that she has with Halbrand, which again was one of the scenes that I really, really liked. Halbrand is saying, she says, you stopped me, and, thank you, you stopped me from killing Adar. And Halbrand goes, oh, well, you stopped me first. It's the, oh, you saved my life. Well, you saved my life first. It's the playing on that trope that plays out in a whole load of things. But what I thought was really, really good about it is it emphasizes Galadriel was fighting with people for people. She was fighting for something. She was fighting to protect the Southlands. She was fighting to save people. It was a positive battle that she was entering into, instead of seeking people down to kill them. Right. And that distinction, although it is very, in a lot of respects, a very minor difference, fighting for something instead of fighting against something. And I think where she was riding into battle to save the Southlanders, where she was riding to chase down Adar, where she was doing all of these things. She sees that there is an opportunity for a better way. And what I truly loved, because these two scenes go so well together, is when she's threatening Adar, she really comes across as potentially evolving into a dark queen. Because he makes that very, very deliberate point.
Exactly.
Morgoth's successor, it could be you. You should have, like, in your mirror. And hey, the nice
your mirror,
reference,
Galadriel's mirror.
the nice reference to Galadriel's mirror. Yes, I did note that. But the essential point that she could turn into the successor to Morgoth, to be the new Sauron. And that's what we see her tempted with at the end of the Third Age. That this is where that temptation stems from. And I think this is where we see her turning her back on that path and becoming the Galadriel that when she is offered that temptation in the future, she goes, no, I know what that path is like. That's why she has the strength to refuse the ring.
Yeah.
That's why she knows what she would become, because she nearly was that. And so I know some people say that these people are ignoring Tolkien or not paying attention enough to Tolkien. How they are dealing with the core characteristics of who Galadriel is, who she becomes, and what her internal struggle is when faced with the temptation of the ring, it may not be how you would have articulated it, but this is going to the very heart of that struggle that Galadriel has in the Third Age. And this is, I think, showing us how she gets that strength to refuse it. So I think this is very Tolkien-esque and really goes to a true understanding of who Galadriel is as a character. There are obviously very broad brushstrokes that Tolkien used to pencil her into the history. There are a number of different ways it could have been done. But this articulation, I think, is actually firmly in line with who Galadriel becomes, and I really appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like the nods that we see here, that I think were thoughtful. And I think that they are, again, paying attention to the bigger themes of pride and humanity's potential for good and evil. And you see it in the aftermath of the initial battle, where some of the dead are not orcs, they're humans. And there's this traumatic discovery. Oh, our friends, our neighbors, our brothers and sisters, all of that. It's really good. That's why I'm willing to forgive certain things, in the presentation of this episode that didn't work so well for me. For example, it felt like to me when you have the juxtaposition of the Numenorians on their way, they're on the ocean, and then you have what's happening in the Southlands, and it's really bad, and it's happening, and then suddenly the Numenorians are not on the ocean, they're on horses and they're riding for the battle. And I'm thinking, this reminds me of that part in Monty Python and
Lancelot in the distance,
where Lancelot is like way in the back, and he's way in the background. He's waiting, and the two guards are like, huh. And then finally, he shows up and da-da-da-da. So it was a little bit like that, and I'm willing to forgive it because of what you were just talking about. These nods, the thoughtfulness about the thematic content, the resonances with other Tolkien stories, or with Tolkien stories, I should say. So there are certain aspects of it, and because it is an action-packed episode, and they had to get in these beats, they had to get in these big moments. I didn't necessarily feel like they led up to the big moments every time the way it would have been satisfying, but it's a show, and these things happen in shows.
I mean, speaking about the Numenorian ships, there are a couple of moments there that I'd like to talk about. And the first is Isildur and the apple.
Yes. Oh, come on.
No, he takes a bite of the apple, feeds part of it to the horse, then takes another bite. That's disgusting.
What is it with all these queasy people? Have you never been around horses before?
Yeah, you take your bites of the apple and then you feed the core to the horse. Plus, you also make sure that your thumb is down, because horses will take your thumb off. Isildur is a numpty. That I've actually I made a note next to my computer. Isildur, you numpty. But and then he doesn't even finish the apple. He lobs it overboard, and you go, and he litters, and he's an idiot. Like,
Oh, come on, it's organic. You can't
but
litter it with an apple core.
Isildur strikes me as that sort of person who just doesn't think ahead. Oh, I'm going to go on this right. It'd be handy if I had a bit of apple left over. No, he's just an idiot. He's a short-sighted idiot. And
Ah.
actually playing on that, it's because obviously Galadriel sees the land first, because Isildur's sight is short-sighted compared to hers.
I see what you did there. Yeah.
But what I liked about that scene, there was a nice exchange between Galadriel and Isildur.
It was, yeah.
And Galadriel had a good line in it. But what I wanted to talk about was the importance of that moment for Isildur as a character. He is the first of the Numenorians to set sight on Middle Earth in that moment. And when we think of Isildur's journey, who he's going to become, and what's going to happen to him, the fact that he is standing there and he sees Middle Earth for the first time. This is a big sort of seminal moment for Isildur, because Isildur and his brother and his father are going to find that entire realm here.
2 realms, yeah.
And it's the fact that he's there, and so you have this moment where he is basically sighting his future kingdom, and the fact that the show took that beat, took that time, so that Isildur, the audience, take in this momentous occasion where he is seeing his future. So I like that moment. I like that moment of homage to Isildur's journey, to who he's going to become, but without drawing too much focus on it. Because they could have done that really cliched thing of Isildur stepping off the boat and touching the earth and running it through his fingers, the way that they always do in these things. And the camera slowly pans round as he stares off, looking heroic. And you go, that's not Isildur yet.
No,
but taking that moment to show him sighting Middle Earth for the first time is their way of doing that without being cliched. So I actually quite enjoyed that.
Yeah, you can tell that the showmakers have in mind the Isildur that will be in the presentation of this youthful character who is a very likable character, but also is ambitious. And you see signs of his future decisions in the presentation of this young, likable character.
What is it? I did not join this expedition to be humbled. You arrogant little. And oh yeah, because Numenor's bad. And you go, yeah, you're just going to set up your own kingdom. Yeah, okay, fine. It's so much of his future is writ large there. If you're aware of what happens.
Yeah.
But what I liked was Galadriel's line to him, which was something about like humility has saved kingdoms that the prideful have led to ruin. Something I can't remember it exactly, but she said like humility has saved the kingdoms that the prideful have led to ruin, something like that.
Yeah.
And of course, that's Numenor. That's Morgoth. That's Sauron. That's even if you think Fëanor and that whole aspect of the Elven society. It's pride, ambition, lust for power. These are the sins that constantly infect the evil in Tolkien's world. And this has been a through line in almost every single episode. They have been hammering home on this point that pride goeth before a fall, that this is the overwhelming sentiment of the Second Age, of great and glorious things leading to false pride, leading to dissolution. And, I think it is such a core aspect of Tolkien's writing. And it's at the very core of this show. And so when people say, oh, there's no Tolkien in it, you go, do you even Tolkien?
You talking Tolkien here? I think that there's another very closely related theme as well, which is humanity's fragility and our capacity for good and evil. And you see it so, I think, beautifully presented in characters like Halbrand, for example. I think we agree his fate is probably not going to be the greatest based on although maybe you've changed your mind based on this episode, but I still think he's got some tragic future ahead of him. But he definitely encapsulates this idea of, yes, we are incredibly courageous sometimes, and we are cowards sometimes. We are incredibly empathetic sometimes, and we're very selfish at times. And he's running away from something really bad, and we know that because he knows Adar, and he's like, "You remember me?" And Adar is like, maybe deliberately, "Nah, who the hell are you?"
But
Uh,
you probably have never seen it, but many years ago there was a film adaptation of a computer game called Street Fighter, and in it there's the character called M Bison, and one of the other characters is like, you killed my family and this night, and he goes like, for you that was a great and important night, for me it was a Tuesday, and that's why he doesn't remember her,
yeah.
because it's like, you're one of the little people, why would I remember you? Whereas for them it was a world shaping event, like their family was destroyed. He's like, yeah, but I've destroyed hundreds of families, like I can't keep them all straight in my head, you're not important.
Yeah. So he's diminishing Halbrand in that moment. Yeah.
And so Halbrand is like, how can you not know what you did? It was so impactful to me. And Adar going, yeah, but you're just another one of the humans. Like, what's the big deal?
Yeah. Well, that's why we know Adar is a villain, because he, as much as we sympathize with his side of things, and that the orcs need a place to live and that they were tortured and et cetera, he doesn't regard other life forms as being very worthy. So yeah, I mean, he's probably not lying.
A bit like you and all those students that you tortured that you can't remember.
I remember their names, all of them.
But there was a great line that Elendil has just after that scene with Galadriel and Isildur in the book. Sorry, I'm working through the show chronologically in my head.
Yeah.
And again, he says something like, he talks about, because they've been living on the east coast of Numenor, that the sun rises over the ocean and sets over the land. Of course, it's reversed now that they're getting to Middle Earth, and how disorienting that is. And for someone who spent a lot of time on the west coast of Ireland, anytime I've spent in Florida, I know exactly that feeling. Of the sudden, it's the same ocean, but you're seeing it in a different direction. But he has this line where he talks about, it feels like night coming. And we've had Tar Palantir talking about the darkness coming. We have Elendil having this sense of darkness. We have darkness and light continually being emphasized all the way through this.
Yeah.
And of course, like the episode ends with darkness covering the sky because of Mount Doom. But I like that so many things are foreshadowed. And you'd said about the Numenorians arriving suddenly, almost like Lancelot. Except, weirdly enough, there is a line, because Isildur, after that moment, speaks to the Queen, Queen Regent, Muriel, and says, it'll be another day's sailing to get there and then a day's ride. And she says, make all possible haste.
Yeah.
And so is it in essence saying speed up? And so instead of it taking 2 days and they rest at night, they rode through the night. And that's why they arrive in the morning. And you go, it's actually in the text. They did it. No, it wasn't emphasized.
Right.
But
I'm not sure those horses could have kept up that pace for that long, but okay.
Well, they were Numenorian horses. They're awesome.
Okay.
And Tolkien loved his horses.
This is true. Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought that was interesting. What about what did you think of the whole trap at the watchtower?
Okay, so we're moving on to the Arondir Bronwyn parts, I guess. Yeah. No, I thought it was clever. It was part of the action, and you do have to admire cleverness. If the orcs had done it, though, we would have thought, "Oh, those nasty orcs," But it was Arondir who did it, so it was like, yeah, But it was cool. I like the action sequences. If I'm just gonna say, in terms of the execution, I thought they did a really good job. As far as I'm not a big television watcher, but I felt like, hey, this is convincing for the most part. A little gory even at times, with the orc having the black.
That was over the top for me.
There was a little. It was like, okay, if you had done it for maybe a couple frames instead of like it's just going on and on like a water fountain.
Yeah, it kind of went on for like one holding at the eye, then back to him, then holding at the eye, then back to him, and you go, if you'd cut out like one of those transitions, it probably
Maybe.
would have been okay. It just went on slightly too long. But one of
Yeah.
the things I liked about that was those trusses and ropes had been around the watchtower from the beginning.
Right. 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 Yeah.
And now we see why. And the fact that they had that there from the very, very beginning, holding this watchtower together, because it hadn't been created by the elves. It was left over from Sauron's time or Morgoth's time.
It doesn't seem
And
like it was very sturdy, though.
the elves kind of just roped it up and went, yeah, fine. Like we're not going to be here that long, only a couple of 100 years. It'll be fine. Um,
Right.
and so I like the fact that that had been there from the very beginning, and now we see why. But also the the plan as it was actually quite a smart plan because
Yeah.
there was the chance that they would have wiped out the vast majority of the orc army. And you go,
Right.
instead of having to defend that keep, because there was the direct route up across the bridge, but then they had the crisscrossing route up the sort of the face. So there were two ways to get to the front door.
Yeah.
And if you have a whole orc army attacking and you're just villagers, you're going to take a lot of losses. But if you can kill the vast majority of them, that makes a lot of sense. So
Although
I
a lot of them
really,
seem to have survived somehow, but yeah.
well, they're orcs. They breed like orcs. Um, but one of the things that I liked, and it's actually quite a subtle thing, Adar, strides up to the keep in the front. I'm the commander. You're gonna opens the door, looks around, and the trap springs. And then if you notice, when they attack the village, they send in a small group of orcs backed up by the sort of
It's
the fodder
humans.
villagers dressed as
Yeah.
orcs, going,
Yeah.
you go and spring any trap that they have. And they wait.
They got a little smarter. Yeah.
And once the trap is sprung, then they spring their trap. And you go, and it's only after they've done everything that then Adar arrives. And you go, so even though he was full of hubris and pride and arrogance, strutting up at the front at the beginning, he's gone, I'm not going to underestimate them again because
Right.
he's smart. He's not a dumb enemy. And
Right.
so underestimating them at the beginning, big mistake, doesn't do it again. And again, so I like that. It's a very subtle thing about the enemy learning, the enemy being smart, the enemy not
Yeah.
just being dumb beasts. And I thought that was it was actually so nicely done in the show.
Yeah.
But
It was a gamble that was worth taking on Arondir's part to try to wipe out the orcs with the tower and all that. Although they went to a much less defensible position in the village than the keep. But yeah.
but that's the calculation you make in any strategic thing. Like if you could wipe out the enemy army, but
Right.
retreat to a semi-defensible position, you go, that might be worth a gamble, or we can stay here where there's no retreat and we'll all get slaughtered. Right. What
Yeah.
would you do? You're like, let's have a trick, see if we can kill them, and retreat somewhere else where we might
Yeah.
survive. You go survivability and wiping out the enemy force kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
Um,
Or you can pull a Waldrig.
oh, Waldrick. Also, I wanted to mention this about what did you think of that whole sequence of the blowing up of Mount Doom?
Yeah. So what was cool about that is there were a lot of people saying, why are they digging these ditches? Why are they digging these trenches and the tunnels, whatever? And it was just kind of like, it seemed like a useless, silly task to put their prisoners to. And we, what was cool about this, we got the answer, right? The puzzle piece fell into place. We were, that it did have it's nice that it connected to the previous episodes. I mean, the visuals were great. I'm not sure about that. I mean, how realistic that is, but who cares? I mean, it was cool. I liked it.
I think I think theoretically that you can blow up a volcano that way.
Yeah. Okay. Then I've never tried myself.
I'm not a volcanologist. I've never
haven't
spent
done
any
this?
time on Vulcan.
No college pranks of this nature that you committed.
But one of the things I liked, and it was before we started talking, I had mentioned this. So Sauron is kind of Diet Morgoth. Adar is kind of Diet Sauron. Each is a level lower, and they're less sophisticated and impressive than their predecessor. Because we hear that Sauron, well, from Adar's perspective, And again, subjective knowledge is not the same as objective reality. But Sauron wanted to heal the land. He wanted everything to be perfect and ordered and structured. And we know this about Sauron. Sauron was an anally retentive perfectionist, and he wanted order. And you look at the construction of that dam. Sauron made that to control the flow of water so that the perfect amount could be put into the river to go and fertilize fields. Everything was going to be controlled. And that's why his sword, his magic sword, is the key. Only he was going to control it. And Adar knows this, knows that this was Sauron's plan to control all of this water and do that. And he goes, I can use that for my people, the orcs, the Uruk. And so he has them dig a big tunnel into the volcano, dig the trench all the way to capture the water and funnel it that way. So he's done a very inelegant version of what Sauron was doing because he's creating the flow of where this river is going to go.
So you're saying that Adar might have sprung this trap earlier than Sauron would have wanted.
Well, I think that if Sauron had planned it, it wouldn't have been a bunch of orcs digging a big trench and all of these tunnels and tunneling down that way. It would have looked a lot more elegant and, crafted because...
Okay. So he's not doing this at Sauron's direction at all.
No, I think maybe this was ultimately Sauron's plan, to use the water to set off Mount Doom.
Right.
But obviously he killed Sauron. Like, you can kill an immortal being who can recorporealize at any moment.
Yeah, I'm with Galadriel on that. I don't think he's telling the truth there. Yeah.
But I don't think Sauron ordered him to do it. I think he knew what the thing was, what it would accomplish. And so set his orcs about doing it in the most direct, inelegant way possible. And I'm assuming that Sauron is sitting somewhere going, oh, no finesse, no class.
Or that Adar could be in a bit of trouble when Sauron turns up.
Well, Adar's always going to be in trouble when Sauron turns up going, you killed me.
Yeah.
I remember you running me through. Not happy about that. But I mean, it's one of the big differences, I think, between something you've mentioned before. Gandalf in The Lord of the Rings, when he falls with the Balrog, has to be recorporealized into a mortal form. But Sauron isn't limited to that. Sauron is a spirit who has assumed a physical shell. It's not the same thing, that you can kill him and he can just recreate a different shell. That he's not limited in the same way that the Astari are.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, well, it was cool. And you I think probably we knew it was coming in one form or another. You had called it early on that this sword was a key to creating Mordor through the eruption of the volcano. So good call, AP. I will give you credit for that.
But we also got to see Arondir have a bit of a smoochy time with Bronwyn. I think a number of people have been waiting on that. They've been building up to that all the way along. And, the eve before battle is when people go,
let it all out. Yeah.
For a wee quickie round by the tree. But I thought it was nice that I think what sells it is he goes like a garden for the two of us.
Yeah.
And Theo. And he includes the stepchild, and then you can see Bronwyn's heart truly melt. It's like, oh, the two of us would be wonderful. Oh, and you included my son. Oh, okay. You are a good guy.
Well, there's actually a lot in this series about fathers and sons when you think about it, and a lot about parents and children. So Adar and his children, right? The orcs. You have, of course, Elendil and Isildur. You've got Arondir assuming a paternal role in the previous episode with the shooting the bow, and now here in this one as well, with Theo, and of course Bronwyn and Theo as well, which leads me to that moment where that Tolkienian moment when they use the lines which you felt were a bit not inserted quite gracefully, but I liked that they were there. And it was a moment too where I actually liked Theo, where before I was more or less annoyed at him. and in that moment, I kind of liked him, and this was an episode that was a good Theo episode for me, anyway.
I think this episode consolidated for me. Theo is evil, confirmed. The
Uh-huh.
lure. Oh, I missed the loss of the power I held. You go evil. He's evil. Future
Well, he's
Nazgul.
human. He's human, isn't he? Yeah.
But and again, the lure of power being emphasized. I like how they keep returning to it. It's a constant sort of touchstone.
Yeah.
But
With an obvious nod to the ring itself, right? I mean, the sword in that moment is talked about in terms very reminiscent of the ring.
and of course, Arondir are trying to break it with the hammer, and it.
Yeah.
Oh yes, because that's how you break an enchanted sword.
He tried.
Yeah.
I mean, it was better than Gimli with his axe trying to destroy the ring. I mean, that didn't go very well either.
Yeah. Yeah. But the second fight in the village where I liked Arondir, firing the arrows and then getting taken down by the orcs, and he does his fancy fighting, and then he backs up into the huge orc.
Yeah.
The first thing that sprung to my mind was, do you remember Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark?
I do, yeah.
Where it's the big Nazi officer at the plane, and they have this big fight, and Indiana Jones is just totally outclassed by the hugeness of this guy. I saw that and went,
good thing that airplane came along, Yeah.
But
anyway.
that sort of classic action trope, and I really enjoyed it because otherwise, if you didn't have a challenge for some of the characters, it would feel too easy all the time. So it's nice seeing, well, it's going to sound bad, it's nice seeing the good guys get beaten every once in a while.
Yeah. I mean, so it's convincing when they win. You don't want it to be too easy, of course.
And there was a nice blend, actually, of CGI effects and practical effects in that entire sequence.
I thought it was well done. Yeah.
What one of the things that really impressed me, though, were the trick writing that the stunt performers did for Galadriel.
Yeah.
Because I've actually seen that in person once, and you sort of go, these people are not human. And just seeing it on screen, and you go, those are real people. That's not CGI. That's actual trick writing.
That's really cool. Yeah, I've ridden a horse before, and for me, just staying on the horse is enough of a trick. But yeah.
And so just seeing her do that to sort of reflect how agile the elves are, instead of doing the CGI thing of weirdness that they did with Legolas. Instead of doing that, they got stunt performers to do it. They went with physical effects and stunt performers, and they still managed to create something that looked almost unworldly because of how cool those tricks are.
Yeah, there was some great visuals in this. I mean, where they always excel in this series, I think, is in the visuals. They do very well, with the exception of the Poodle Ward, which I didn't really love.
But you didn't like I think a lot of people reacted badly to the design of it. The actual CGI of it.
The details are awesome. Yes, true.
And its animation was really well done. But it was, I think it was the eyes that people went, that's just not scary.
And the poodle hairdo on top.
And you go, okay, well, that's a design issue. And you go, fine, you don't have to like it. But there was nothing wrong with the actual CGI. It was animated brilliantly.
Yeah. Oh, yes. I mean, in terms of the level of detail, and you showed me the picture the other day of that warg, and I was like, whoa, you can see like just the little speck of saliva and everything on there. It's pretty damn impressive, actually.
Why don't I tell you very quickly the 4 things that I had issues with in this episode.
Okay, I want to hear them.
So the eye goop scene that we've discussed, that went on a little too long. I think maybe 2 shots too long. It was excessive eye goop, and the tension was there. You didn't need to keep going. So I think that could have been shortened just a tiny bit.
It also makes me think of Bronwyn's arrow wound when the blood was gushing out of her. And
that was the same thing. It went, her sort of passing out, is she dead thing. That went on about 2 seconds too long. Yeah. Because we all know it's also the lazy trope of cauterize the wound and they'll be fine. This is one of those tropes that has been around forever, and I wish it would just die and go away.
Now,
but it's not the Rings of Power's fault.
Are you speaking as a doctor here?
as a doctor involved in telling stories, yes, don't use this in a story. Like this has been around forever
Yeah.
in movies and TV shows that someone gets a really bad wound and they cauterize the skin, and you go, that doesn't cauterize the inside of the wound.
Yeah.
But this is
bleed internally then, I guess.
But this is just TV shorthand for, yeah, we took care of it. Films have been doing this forever. I don't really blame the Rings of Power for this one. It just annoys me. But yeah, so they cauterize the wound. Bronwyn faking passed out death for a wee bit too long, the eye goop too long, and Halbrand teleporting on his horse to get ahead of Adar.
Yeah.
If they had shown Adar going in a sort of circle thing and Halbrand looking up and taking a shortcut, I would have believed it. But he just suddenly comes out of nowhere from the opposite side. I went, but I will tell you a thing that they did do immediately after that I went, oh, they made sure to hold the camera on the horse to show that the horse was okay and that the horse hadn't been injured.
After he tripped it with a spear. Yeah.
Because we didn't want the horse to be, the horse was a Numenorian horse.
Yeah.
It wasn't his fault.
Any horse, of course.
And so that was nice. But so in all honesty, those are my major complaints about this particular episode, was just a couple of things that.
Those are minor major complaints.
Yeah, they like we've said about a lot of this stuff, a lot of it is quibbles and a lot of it is preferences. And if your preference, like me, is not big action, then yeah. But if your preference is action, then it's there. But that's a preference thing, not to do with good or bad or evaluation of the storytelling.
Right.
But there were so many good touches to it. There were so many nice moments in it, and positive exchanges. The wrapping up of certain story or closing off elements of certain storylines.
Mm-hmm.
But we do need to broach: is Halbrand Sauron? Because this is a theory. Now, you kind of went with is Halbrand Sauron early on.
I mean, there was an option. It was always an option. I never found it convincing. I'll be honest.
I know, but I am still leaning toward he'll end up King of the Dead. But
okay, of the Oathbreakers. You mean of the Oathbreakers?
Yeah. Okay. But his armor does have a lot of rings on it. He knew Adar.
Is it ring mail?
He knew Adar, and Adar's like, "Who are you?" And then there's this whole: does Adar actually know him, or is this Sauron reincarnated into a new body thing? He says to Galadriel, "I would bind." When talking about that feeling, I would bind it to me. So uses the word bind, which of course, and in the darkness, bind them.
Bind them. Yeah.
We see that it was his plan, the plan being enacted. So there are all of these elements that you suddenly go, I really wish they would just make up their mind about. I am fed up with the mystery box element of who is Sauron. I still think that Sauron is in Eregion and isn't.
Yeah, I was just gonna say if Halbrand is Sauron, that blows your mithril theory out of the water.
No,
so
like he could have told those lies like a year ago.
Okay. All right.
But I still think that Halbrand isn't Sauron. I don't. I think they've put in things like this just to try and egg on conversation about it.
I think it would be more interesting, honestly, if he's not Sauron.
Yeah.
I would be more interested in that, and because of the relationship that's developing between him and Galadriel, and there are plenty of moments there where it's clear that this is a man who is struggling with. He's torn between being good or evil. That's not Sauron, So they would have to explain a lot if you go back in the series and you look at Halbrand's character development and his relationship with Galadriel. There's no way you could explain, oh, that was Sauron being super sneaky there. Nah, I don't think so.
Yeah. So I think if he turned out to be Sauron, I would be very disappointed.
I would too.
Unless they come up with an amazing reason for it. Yeah. But while we're on the subject of Halbrand,
yeah,
when Elendil got in trouble, and Isildur is riding down to save him,
yeah,
and he's too slow. Halbrand does it. I actually like that because if if Isildur had arrived to save his dad, you would have gone cliche, trope, blah, and Halbrand does it. But the moment I think that really works for Halbrand in this episode is his final acceptance of the role of king.
Uh-huh.
Because ever since he's been introduced, he started off denying it, then he was equivocating, and then we had that sequence where before they were heading out, and he'd thrown the pouch on the table in Numenor,
Yeah.
and then he went back and picked it up,
Grabbed it. Yeah.
and even then you could see that, and he walks onto the ship and he's wearing the armor, and it's a real Aragorn moment.
Yeah.
But he's debating it the entire time. This has been at the core of should he accept or should he not? And we see he's suddenly in that moment where Bronwyn is looking at him, everyone is looking at him, and he makes the decision, yes, I am king.
And 5 seconds later, the damn mountain blows up and it becomes Mordor.
But that, for me, I thought was a really nice evolution and building of it had all been foreshadowed. It had been built to this moment.
Yeah.
How he was going backwards and forwards. Even the talk he had with Galadriel earlier that day figures into this, that he realizes there's something more than just revenge. And in that moment, he chooses that. And so I really liked that moment. I thought that was excellent. It had been foreshadowed. It had been dealt with. The tensions were all there. And then he makes the decision. And you have the whole swelling of the music. And, yay, isn't this great? And then almost quite literally all hell breaks loose.
Yep. Yeah. Hell does break loose. I mean, Udûn means what? Something like hell, doesn't it? It means like a dark hole or something like that. Or yeah.
Yeah, it was the name of an area
Elvish.
at the top of Mordor. And I think it was one of Morgoth's citadels had a name like Udûn.
Okay, yeah, maybe.
But yeah,
Yeah.
it essentially is kind of like dark pit,
Dark
hell.
pit. Yeah.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. And then in Sindarin, or I think, right? In one of the Elvish languages. Yeah. So
Who knows? But did you catch that bit at the start where one of the orcs says Gimbatul?
oh my goodness, there was a lot of even I think when Galadriel urges on her horse, is the same thing that Arwen says to the horse in Fellowship of the Ring? Weren't there a lot of those kind of things?
No, but at the beginning, because he's using the black speech and he says find them, and he says Gimbatul. So that and everyone recognizes that from the Ring poem. So that was actually, I like it when they do things like that. It pleases the little Tolkien nerd inside me.
Yes, the little Tolkien nerd needs to be, have those little Easter eggs,
So was there anything else that you wanted to talk about in this? Because I think structurally with the Numenorian and the Southland storylines intertwining to then the latter half of the episode being one storyline, I think that simpler focus is much more palatable to the majority of people. The closing off of storylines to show development and progression, I think, pleased a lot of people. The action sequences, I think, pleased a lot of people.
Yeah.
So I think this was an episode that had the things in it that people had kind of wanted earlier, but weren't getting in sufficient quantity. And it was a big episode. A lot happened in it. And, a lot of people died.
There was an appropriate build-up to this that I appreciate, that I was anticipating and hoping would happen near the end of the season. So great. I think that's a good thing. I will go on the record as saying that I missed the Harfoots, and I also missed Elrond and Durin. And Disa as well. I like those storylines, and I get why we needed to focus on these two and meld them together. And I anticipate that we will be having the Harfoots certainly melding with this storyline that has now been formed into one out of two, because they were headed in this direction, I think, right? So we might see some meeting up of these other threads in the series in the near future.
Although I will say I didn't miss Elrond and Durin and Disa because they're always with me in my heart. You cold, empty, shallow shell of a man. You need to see them. That's the only way that you can appreciate. I carry them with me all the time, Philip, because I'm caring and you're evil.
I didn't realize you had such a special bond with them.
Uh, but
Uh,
anything else then, my friend?
no, I think we're good. I enjoyed this discussion a ton, so thank you for that. And I thought that they did what I hoped and expected would happen. All the setting up is beginning to, we're getting the momentum of the climax, I think, for the season one, and the fact that things are falling into place, like the trenches and tunnels being this network that was a deliberate creation in order to bring about the result of Mount Doom doing its thing. I thought that was good. I think there's been thought put into this series, and they have definitely. I think if you're patient enough to let it happen, let it unfold, you can appreciate some of the stuff that they started to do in the very first episode up until now, and watching it unfold. It's been a lot of fun. So I expect some interesting things to happen too.
Well, actually, you just hit on a really, really good point there that I just want to expand on for a second.
Sure.
There's been a lot of stuff that has been mentioned early on that people have disagreed with or they haven't liked. And yet now we're seeing that a lot of those were actual very deliberate seeds because we're seeing them pay off. That thing about the tunnel especially, I remember someone commented on the video saying it was a trench and they called it a tunnel. And you go, that part was a trench, but we now see that there was a tunnel down into the mountain. And when they said the tunnel has been finished, they weren't talking about the trench. They were talking about the tunnel.
Well, there were always tunnels too. I mean, going under the village, that's what they first discovered. There were tunnels.
So I think a lot of things that people were flagging up earlier as this is a mistake or me talking about the springtime deadline for Eregion's Tower, that I am hoping there'll be a reason given for it because but now I'm actually trusting them to deliver on a lot of the things that they have been building up because they keep sowing these seeds and you go, yeah, season one, the first couple of episodes, sow the stuff so that you can then build toward and reap the sort of the fruits of it. So I think this episode proved that they do know what they are doing in a lot of regards. And
I agree.
They have a very definite story that they are telling and they're telling it their way.
Yep. 100% agree. Yep.
And on that note, thank you very much, Philip. Thank you for joining me.
Pleasure.
And for those of you still watching, thank you very much for watching. Thank you for your continued support, and we'll see you in the next one.